He destroyed her. He buried their son. He built an empire on that lie. 20 years later, she walked back through his doors. If you've never seen a man who controls half of South Korea's criminal underworld go completely still, not from fear, not from rage, but from the kind of shock that strips a person down to nothing, then you've never been in the same room as Kang Tae-hyun on the night his past walked back into his life wearing silk and 20 years of silence. Stay with this story until the end. Hit that like button and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The ballroom of the Grand Hyeon Hotel had been rented out entirely for the evening. Every table filled, every chandelier lit, every powerful person in Seoul who mattered, and a few who mattered more than they admitted, seated with drinks in hand and careful expressions on their faces. It was the kind of room where the wrong glance across a table could cost a man his business license by morning, where a smile directed at the wrong person could rearrange family alliances that had held for a generation. And at the center of it all, behind a long obsidian table on a raised platform draped in dark silk, sat Kang Tae-hyun. He was 53 years old, and he looked every year of it in ways that had nothing to do with vanity. The lines in his face were not decorative. They were records. His hair had gone silver at the temples a decade ago, and he'd let it, because men in his position didn't need to pretend. He wore a charcoal suit that had been cut for him by a tailor in Gangnam who had never once asked what Tae-hyun did for a living because the tailor valued his continued operation. On Tae-hyun's right hand, a single platinum ring. On his face, the expression he had worn so long it had stopped being an expression and become a feature. Composed, remote, the eyes never quite landing on anything for too long. The succession ceremony had been planned for 6 months. Tonight was the night Kang Tae-hyun would formally designate his organizational hierarchy for the next decade, cementing loyalties, restructuring alliances, and sending a message to every rival faction operating between Seoul and Busan that the Shadow King was not fading, was not weakening, was not the kind of man whose empire would drift into the hands of chaos because he'd made the mistake of growing older. The invitation list had been curated down to the essential. Politicians whose careers had been quietly underwritten by Kang Foundation donations. Corporate executives whose companies held contracts that existed because of introductions Tae-hyun had facilitated. Senior figures from 3 separate criminal organizations that operated under the Han River Accord, a peace agreement that Tae-hyun himself had brokered 11 years ago after a street war that had cost 47 lives and made the national news for 2 weeks before disappearing, as these things always did, into the bureaucratic fog of ongoing investigations that never concluded. They were all here. They were all watching him. And Kang Tae-hyun sat at that obsidian table and felt, for the first time in longer than he could clearly remember, the physical sensation of being entirely in control of every variable in a room. He had earned this. The weight of it. The silence that fell when he entered a space, the instinctive recalibration that happened in the posture of every person who recognized his face. He had built this with years of decisions that he did not apologize for, had made sacrifices he categorized as necessary, had cut away everything that threatened what he was constructing until what remained was clean and functional and terrible in the way that a well-maintained weapon is terrible, not inherently malicious, but precise and pointed. Park Jun-seok sat to his right, vice chairman of the Kang organization. 46 years old, broad-shouldered, with the kind of confident stillness that men who expected to inherit power carry in their bodies before the inheritance is confirmed. He had been waiting 7 years for this evening, not patiently, exactly. Patience implies the absence of appetite, and Park had never been without appetite, but strategically. He had waited the way a man waits, who has calculated his odds and found them favorable, and sees no reason to disrupt a trajectory that is moving in his direction. He leaned slightly toward Tae-hyun and said quietly, "The Daegu delegation is seated. Chairman Lim looks comfortable." "Chairman Lim always looks comfortable," Tae-hyun said. "That's what makes him dangerous." Park absorbed this without comment, which was one of the things Tae-hyun had always found professionally useful about him. The man knew when to stop talking. Across the room, near the south wall, Yoon Se-rin stood holding a glass of white wine she had not touched. She was 51, slim, with short-cropped hair and the contained posture of someone who had spent decades making themselves easy to overlook. Her official title within the Kang structure was Chief Legal Consultant. Her unofficial function was considerably more complex, and had been for 20 years. She had Tae Hyun's complete professional trust, and she had earned it, in the sense that a person who builds a cage and then hands the key to the person inside it has earned a particular variety of trust, the trust of complete dependency, dressed as loyalty. She was watching the entrance. Tae Hyun noticed, because he noticed everything, but he filed it without comment. Serin was cautious by nature. She always watched entrances. The MC was moving toward the microphone. The room was settling, conversations dropping to murmurs, the specific shift in collective energy that signals an event is about to formally begin. Tae Hyun lifted his water glass, drank once, set it down precisely where it had been. The ballroom doors opened. Not the side doors that servers moved through, the main doors. Both of them, simultaneously, pushed open from outside with the kind of deliberate, unhurried force that communicates intention. Tae Hyun's eyes moved to the entrance. The woman who walked through was tall. Taller than he remembered, though he understood, in the fraction of a second before his higher cognition caught up with what he was seeing, that this was not a memory he had recently consulted. She wore a black silk gown that moved with her body as though it had been made to. Her hair was natural, close-cropped, framing a face that had been sculpted by 20 years of a life he had not witnessed into something that bore the original features he remembered but carried them differently. The same eyes, but with a quality behind them that had not been there before. Or perhaps it had always been there and he had not been paying attention. She walked without hurrying. She walked without looking anywhere but forward. The room went very quiet in the way that rooms go quiet when something has entered that the nervous systems of the people inside it have not yet classified. Kang Tae-hyun's hand, resting on the obsidian table, became completely still. His chest did something it had not done since he was young enough to be surprised by his own body. She stopped 20 feet from the platform. Her name was Naomi Brooks Kang. He had sent her to prison 33 years ago. He had received a report 19 years ago that said she had died in the infirmary of Chungbuk Women's Correctional Facility, along with the child she had been carrying. He had read that report once, in his office, alone, and then he had locked it in a drawer and he had not opened the drawer again, and he had not permitted himself to think about it in any organized way because organized thought in that direction produced something that interfered with his ability to function. She was not dead. She was standing in his ballroom wearing black silk and looking at him with an expression that he could not name. Not hatred, not grief, not triumph, though perhaps some architecture beneath the surface contained all three. And then the doors moved again. The young man who walked in behind her was 19 years old. He was tall, at least 185 centimeters, and he had the kind of presence that fills space without effort, not aggressive, not performed, simply present in a way that drew attention the way a still point draws attention in a moving room. His jaw was sharp, his eyes were dark and composed. He moved with a deliberate stillness that Tae Hyun recognized with a physical shock that moved through him from sternum to spine. He recognized it because he had seen it in mirrors. The young man walked to Naomi's left side and stopped. He did not look at the assembled guests. He did not look at the chandeliers or the tables or the politicians or the crime bosses or the corporate executives who had all turned, every single one of them, to watch. He looked at Tae Hyun, and he did not look afraid. At the south wall, the glass in Yoon Se-rin's hand cracked under the pressure of fingers she had forgotten she was clenching. The silence lasted approximately 4 seconds. 4 seconds is long. 4 seconds in a room full of people who have spent their careers reading the emotional temperature of spaces and adjusting their behavior accordingly. 4 seconds of collective held breath is an eternity. In the 5th second, the murmuring started, low and controlled, the sound of very powerful people attempting to process unexpected information without allowing their processing to show. Tae Hyun stood up. He did it slowly, without urgency, because urgency was something he allowed himself in private and never in front of witnesses, but his legs carried him to standing before he had consciously decided to move, which told him something about the state of his nervous system that he would examine later when he was alone. When there were no cameras and no witnesses and no one to watch him be something other than what he had built. "Clear the platform," he said to the aide standing 2 meters to his left. The aide moved. The 2 men who had been standing at Tae Hyun's flanks stepped back. The MC, who had been holding the microphone with the frozen expression of a man who has discovered the script for the evening, has been replaced with something he has never rehearsed, retreated to the edge of the stage. Tae-hyun walked down the 3 steps from the raised platform to the ballroom floor. He moved through the space between the front tables, and the people seated at those tables adjusted, not dramatically, but with the small, precise movements of people giving way to something they had decided, instinctively, to give way to. He stopped 6 feet from Naomi. Up close, the years were different than they had been from the distance of the stage. He could see the texture of them, the fine lines at the corners of her eyes, the set of her mouth that spoke of a jaw held tight for a long time. She was 48 years old. She had been 28 the last time he had looked at her face directly. And at 28 she had been fierce and quick and furious, had looked at the world with an appetite for it that he had found, in the early years, before everything, entirely intoxicating. The woman standing in front of him now was not that woman. She was heavier with herself, more deliberate. The fierceness was still there, but it had been compressed into something denser, something that did not flare and spark, but simply existed as a constant temperature. "Naomi," he said. He had not said that word aloud in 19 years. His own voice sounded strange to him. "Tae-hyun," she said. No title, no deference. Just his name, in her voice, with the particular American intonation that had always wrapped the syllables differently than a Korean speaker would, and that he had, at some point long enough ago that he could no longer mark the date, allowed himself to stop missing. He looked at the young man beside her. The young man looked back. Taehyun's chest did the thing again. Worse this time. "His name is Elias," Naomi said. "Elias Brooks. He uses my name. I made sure of that." Taehyun could not stop looking at the young man's face. It was a disorienting thing, to see your own architecture on a person you have never met. The jaw, yes. The eyes, darker than his own, but with the same quality of focused stillness. The way the young man held his shoulders, which was exactly the way Taehyun had stood at 19. Before the years had redistributed the tension in his body. "He's alive," Tae-hyun said. His voice was level. He had made it level. Underneath the level, something was moving that he was not going to let move in this room. "He's been alive for 19 years, Naomi said. "While you were building your empire, your son was learning to read, learning to run, learning what kind of man he was going to become, without you." She paused. "Because of you." The room was very, very quiet. Taehyun became aware, in the way he was always aware of rooms as systems, that every person present was recalculating. The information density of the last 3 minutes had been extraordinary. The Shadow King, standing on his ballroom floor, confronted by a woman he had imprisoned and a son he believed dead. Every alliance in the room was already adjusting, already finding new load-bearing points, already considering what this revelation meant for the structures that had been built in the assumption of Tae-hyun's complete control over his own narrative. Park Jun-seok was still at the table on the platform. Tae-hyun could feel the man's attention on his back like a hand. He did not turn around. "Why are you here?" he asked Naomi. "I'm here," she said, "because my son asked me to give you a choice." She reached into a small black clutch and withdrew a folded document. She held it out toward him, not extending it far enough that he could take it without stepping forward, which meant she had positioned it precisely, which meant everything she was doing was positioned precisely, had been thought through, which he should have expected, but which still landed on him like information he needed to revise his understanding around. He wants to know his father. He's 19 years old. He made this decision himself. I don't agree with it, but I raised him to make his own decisions, and this is the one he's made. Taehyun stepped forward. He took the document. He unfolded it. It was 3 pages, single-spaced. He read it the way he read contracts, not for narrative, but for structure, for the places where the language shifted from permissive to prohibitive, for what was given and what was taken. No private meetings with Elias without Naomi present for the first year. No financial transfers, gifts, or property in Elias's name. No contact with any member of Taehyun's organization, current or former, to be directed at or through Elias. Taehyun would submit to a full accounting of the evidence that had been used to convict Naomi, a genuine accounting with access to original documents, within 30 days. Any attempt to influence, surveil, control, or manipulate Elias, or Naomi would terminate the agreement immediately and permanently. And at the bottom, a signature line. Tae-hyun looked up from the document. Elias was watching him read. There was no impatience in the young man's face, no performance of waiting, just attention. The kind of attention you see in people who have learned to observe without needing to perform their observation. You understand, Tae-hyun said. And he was speaking to Elias directly, for the first time, which felt significant in a way he could not immediately articulate. What it costs me to sign this? Elias looked at him for a moment. Yes, he said. His voice was low, controlled. American accent, English, but the cadences were slightly different than Naomi's, his own thing, built from his own life. I understand exactly what it costs you. That's the point. Tae-hyun held the young man's gaze. Then he said, Get me a pen. An aide appeared with a pen within 30 seconds, because aides in Tae-hyun's world had learned that hesitation was a category of failure. Tae-hyun uncapped it, held the document against the face of the document itself, and signed. The signature was the same he had used for 40 years, controlled, minimal, a single angular mark that said nothing about the person who made it. He folded the document. He gave it back to Naomi. She looked at it in her hands for a moment, and he watched her face for something. Some flicker of satisfaction, some release. He saw neither. She folded it into the clutch with the same deliberate precision with which she had done everything tonight, and then she looked at him. We'll be in touch, she said. I know where I can reach you, he said, and then stopped because the statement assumed the kind of surveillance he had, in the document he'd just signed, forsworn. The slip was small. It cost him something. He could tell by the way her expression shifted, barely, just a millimeter, that she had heard it. Through the attorney listed on page 3, she said. That's how you reach us. She turned. Elias held the eye contact with Tae-hyun for one additional beat, long enough to be intentional, not long enough to be aggression, and then followed her. They walked back toward the ballroom doors the same way they had entered, without hurrying, without looking back. The doors closed behind them. The room sat in the aftermath. Tae-hyun stood where he was. He did not move immediately, because moving immediately would communicate that he was responding to what had just happened, and he had not yet decided how to present this to the room. He needed a moment to construct the frame, to decide what this was going to mean in the story the assembled witnesses would carry out with them tonight and repeat in the days following. He turned back to the room. Every face was watching him. He walked back to the platform, climbed the 3 steps, returned to his seat. He picked up his water glass. He drank from it. Then he said calmly to the MC, Continue. But nothing about the evening continued as it had been designed. The ceremony moved forward on its scheduled tracks. The speeches were delivered. The formal designations were announced. Park Jun-seok's position reaffirmed. The organizational hierarchy ratified. But the room's attention was fractured, divided between the performance on the stage and the conversation that everyone was already having in the small spaces between words, with their eyes, with the slight angles of their bodies toward each other. Tae-hyun sat through all of it with his composed face and his level breathing and the document he had just signed folded in his inner jacket pocket against his chest. The ceremony ended at 11. The guests dispersed over the next 40 minutes, the careful extended farewells of people who wanted to linger and gather information but couldn't be seen lingering to gather information. By midnight, the ballroom was nearly empty. The cleaning staff had begun moving through the far edges. Park Jun-seok found Tae-hyun near the north window, looking out over the Han River. He stood beside him for a moment without speaking. The lights of the city moved on the dark water. This was something they had done before, this standing together in silence, because their working relationship had, over the years, developed the particular formality of 2 people who respected each other's competence and trusted each other's calculation and had never once actually known each other. The distinction mattered. The woman, Park said. Naomi Brooks. Brooks Kang, Tae-hyun said. She kept the name. He had not known this until tonight, and the fact that she had kept it, through 20 years of prison and rebuilding and whatever the life between then and now had consisted of, sat in him oddly, like something not fully digested. Her appearance will create complications. It already has. The Daegu faction, Park said. Chairman Lim was visibly unsettled. If he begins questioning the stability of your— I know what Lim will question, Taehyun said. I know what everyone in that room will question. I don't need you to inventory it. Park was quiet for a moment. Then, the boy. My son, Taehyun said. He said it flatly, without inflection, but he said it. He's a disruption, Park said. His existence, the circumstances of it, the way it was revealed, publicly, in front of every significant figure in our network, that's not an accident. She planned it this way. She wanted the maximum audience. She got it. Which means she wanted witnesses. She wanted it on record that the succession ceremony was interrupted by a woman you imprisoned and a child she claims is yours. He is mine, Taehyun said. There was a quality in his voice that made Park go briefly still. I know what my own face looks like. Park adjusted. Of course. My point is the strategic vulnerability. If the boy becomes a figure that factions can rally around as an alternative, he's 19 years old, Taehyun said. He's not a faction rallying point. He's a person. The word landed in the silence between them. Park looked at him. Get some sleep, Taehyun said. We have meetings starting at 8. Park left. Taehyun stayed at the window. Yet, he did not sleep that night. He sat in the car on the way back to his residence and looked at the city moving past the window and did the thing he had disciplined himself over decades not to do. He let himself remember. Not the entire architecture, not all of it, just pieces. Naomi at 24 when he had first met her. She had been a financial consultant working for a firm that Taehyun's organization used for structured investment services. Legitimate side, nothing complicated. She had been sharp in the way that people who have had to be sharp to earn their position are sharp, with an edge to her professional manner that she wore openly because she had learned that men in the room she worked in would interpret softness as incompetence. She had been the only person in 3 years of professional interactions who had, in a meeting, flatly corrected something Taehyun said in front of 6 other people without hesitating for a half-second to gauge his reaction first. He had been so startled that he had laughed. That had been the beginning. They had been together for 4 years before Serin had come to him with the documents. 4 years that had contained, in addition to every complication that comes with building a criminal empire while in a relationship with a person who had a completely different relationship to the law and morality, something that Taehyun had not had before, and had not known how to name at the time, and had subsequently refused to name because naming it would have made the decision he'd made in response to Serin's documents into a different category of thing than the one he'd been able to live with. Serin had brought him financial records, money movements between Naomi's accounts, and the account of a man named Choi Hyun-jae, who was, Serin had explained, with documents and witness statements, working for a rival organization. The rival organization who wanted Taehyun's territory. Naomi, Serin had argued, had been feeding them organizational information for 8 months. The evidence was clean, audited, coherent. He had looked at it for 2 hours. He had not asked Naomi. He had not called her, had not summoned her, had not walked into whatever room she was in and laid the documents on the table in front of her and said, "Explain this." Because some part of him, and he had never examined this part, had kept it sealed as precisely as he kept the drawer sealed. Some part of him had not been able to tolerate the possibility that the explanation would be good enough, and he would have to find another reason for the thing he was already doing, the thing he had already, in the 2 hours of looking at Serin's documents, begun to feel was the only logical move. He had been afraid of Naomi, not of what she would do, of what she made him, of the thing she could see in him that he could not fully control, the specific angle of his own reflection in her eyes that was honest in ways that the mirror wasn't, of the softness in his hands when she was near them. He had been building something enormous and terrible, and he needed his hands to be hard. So he had given the order, and she had gone to prison. And the report had come 19 years ago, and he had locked it in the drawer, and he had made himself hard enough to finish what he was building. He sat in the car and looked at the city and understood, with the particular clarity that comes in the middle of the night when there are no performances to maintain, that none of it had been about the documents. The first contact came through the attorney on page 3 of the agreement, 4 days after the ceremony. A brief message, formal. Elias was available the following Saturday, if Taehyun wished to meet. The location would be a specific cafe in Mapo district, a public space. Duration? 2 hours. Naomi would be present. Taehyun replied through his own lawyer he would be there. He did not bring security. The agreement had not prohibited it, but bringing security to a cafe in Mapo to meet a 19-year-old felt like a particular kind of statement about who he was, and he was already navigating enough statements about who he was. He wore civilian clothes, dark slacks, a gray coat, and he took a car without the Kang Foundation plates, and he arrived 3 minutes early. Naomi and Elias were already there. The cafe was small and moderately busy, the kind of place where the music was kept at a level that provided cover for conversation without drowning it. They were at a corner table, Naomi with both hands around a coffee cup, Elias with a glass of water. They looked at that moment the way families look in public spaces, simply present, private, in a way that was not exclusive but was contained. Taehyun sat down. A server came. He ordered coffee he did not intend to drink. For a moment nobody spoke, and the silence had a texture to it, not hostile, but dense, full of everything that would need to be moved through to reach anything resembling conversation. Elias spoke first. "My mother told me about you," he said. "Not everything. She told me what you did, not why. She said the why was for you to explain." Taehyun looked at him. At this young man who had his face and had been raised by the person he had wronged most completely in his life, in a life that had contained significant wrongdoing. "That's fair," he said. "I'm not looking for an apology," Elias said. "I want to understand what happened. I want to hear it from you, what you believed, what you decided, how you did it." "You want the mechanics," Taehyun said. "I want the truth," Elias said. "I've had 19 years with one version. I want yours." Taehyun's coffee arrived. He wrapped both hands around it. "I was given evidence," he said. He was going to tell it plainly. He owed this young man plainness, even if it cost him. "Evidence that your mother was feeding organizational information to a rival group. Financial records. Witness testimony. It was put together well. I looked at it for 2 hours." "And?" Elias said. "And I didn't ask her," Taehyun said. "I didn't confront her with it. I gave the order without talking to her first." Naomi's hands tightened around her cup, but she didn't speak. "Why?" Elias said. Not a question exactly. A prompt. "Because I was afraid," Taehyun said. The words came out without the hesitation he had expected. They came out level, which was almost worse than if they'd been difficult. "I was afraid of what she could see in me, and I had decided to become something that required I stop being seen clearly." The cafe moved around them. Music. Other people's conversations. Ordinary life, indifferent to the specific weight at this particular table. Elias looked at him for a long moment. "Did you ever believe she was guilty?" he asked. Taehyun held the young man's gaze. "No," he said. "Not completely, not after the first week." He said it and felt the admission land with its full weight, felt the specific ugliness of it, which was not the ugliness of a man who had made a mistake in good faith, but the ugliness of a man who had known, at some level, and had chosen anyway. Elias nodded slowly. "Okay," he said. "That's the first honest thing anyone from your world has said to me." They met 4 more times over the following month, always in public spaces, always with Naomi present. The conversations ranged from practical things, Elias asking about the business structure of the Kang organization, with a forensic curiosity that told Taehyun this young man had done considerable prior research, to more personal territory that Elias approached with the same methodical caution he seemed to apply to everything. Taehyun was not a man who had practiced being known. He had practiced being assessed. He had practiced being negotiated with, tested, deferred to. He understood the social geometry of rooms where everyone was performing strength. What he did not have practice with was a 19-year-old who asked direct questions and waited, without impatience, for direct answers, and who received what he was given with neither judgment nor approval, just a steady absorption, as though he were building a picture from pieces that he would eventually hold up to the light and examine. It was uncomfortable. Taehyun leaned into it. He was, if nothing else, a man who had learned to lean into discomfort when running from it cost more. He also began, during this period, to notice that he was being watched. Not by Naomi. Her attention was open, constant, the watchfulness of a person who had not yet determined whether the thing in front of her was safe, and was not pretending otherwise. Not by Elias, whose attention was direct and deliberate and known. By Seirin. She was careful. She always had been. But he had known her for 25 years, had watched her move through the architecture of his organization for 2.5 decades. And he had learned the way you learn certain things about people you spend long stretches of time in proximity to. The specific signature of her attention when she was worried, the particular set of her shoulders, the 3-second delays before she answered questions she had already prepared answers for. She was worried. He filed this and said nothing. 3 weeks after the succession ceremony, Park Jun-seok came to his office for their standing Monday briefing. He sat across from Tae-hyun and delivered the operational summary, revenue numbers, a dispute in the Incheon distribution network, a potential problem with a customs official who had started asking questions his salary did not justify. And Tae-hyun listened to all of it and noted it and responded with the appropriate decisions. Then Park said, "The boy, Elias. He's been meeting with someone." Tae-hyun looked at him. "I asked you," Tae-hyun said, "to refrain from surveillance related to Naomi or Elias. I believe I said that clearly." "I'm not surveilling him," Park said. "The information came incidentally." "Information that comes incidentally about people I have specifically asked not to be surveilled is information I don't receive," Tae-hyun said, "incidentally or otherwise." Park held his gaze. "He's been meeting with a journalist," Park said, "from the Hankyoreh. She covers organized crime. She's been working on a piece about the Kong Foundation for 8 months. Tae-hyun's face did not change. His breathing did not change. These were skills that took years to develop, and he had had those years. "That's his right," he said. "He's 19 years old and he's meeting with a journalist who's been building a case against your organization for 8 months, Park said. "I understand the terms of the agreement. I'm not suggesting action. I'm suggesting you consider whether the agreement's terms are creating—" "The agreement's terms," Tae-hyun said, "are not open for reconsideration." "Tae-hyun, are we finished?" Park left. Tae-hyun sat at his desk for a while afterward, not working, just sitting. Outside his window, Seoul moved through the afternoon with its ordinary indifference. The city did not care about his particular calculus. It never had. He thought about Elias meeting a journalist. He thought about a young man who had grown up with one version of a story and was, apparently, doing what people who want more versions do. He was asking questions. He was collecting information. He was being thorough. He was, Tae-hyun thought, not so unlike his father, which was either encouraging or devastating. And Tae-hyun had not yet decided which, but the call came on a Thursday, just before 7 in the evening. Tae-hyun was in the car, moving through the Gangnam traffic, when his private phone, not the organizational phone, the one with the number that fewer than 12 people possessed, buzzed with a number he recognized as belonging to one of the secure relay contacts he'd set up years ago for urgent communications. He answered. The voice on the other end was one of 3 men he trusted with operational information at the level that this call would likely contain. And the man's voice was tight in the way that voices get when the situation requires control, but the speaker is running on adrenaline. "There are 2 vehicles," the man said, "parked within sight of the boys' apartment building, Yongsan District. They've been there since noon." Tae-hyun's hand on the phone was completely still. "How many men?" he said. 4. 2 per vehicle, professional positioning, not police." "Who authorized it?" A pause. "I can't confirm directly, but the vehicles are registered to a shell company that traces back through 3 layers to—" "Don't say it over the phone," Tae-hyun said. "No. Pull back. I don't want anything near that building that belongs to me." "Understood." He ended the call. He sat in the traffic and felt something move through him that was not an emotion he had significant prior experience with, not rage, which he knew, which was familiar and functional, but something sharper, something that came from the part of him that had been, for the past 4 weeks, across tables in small cafes, looking at his own face on a young man who had grown up without him, and who was, despite this, choosing to give him a chance that he had not earned. He dialed Park Jun-seok. Park answered on the second ring. "The vehicle's near Yongsan," Tae-hyun said. A pause. "I don't know what—" "Don't," Tae-hyun said. "Don't do that. I have spent 20 years in your company, and I know exactly what it sounds like when you know something and are choosing not to confirm it. I am not going to have this conversation twice. Park was quiet. The goal, Park said carefully, was to clarify the situation. To manage the situation, Tae-hyun said, is my son. He had said it again, with the same flat weight. And then he said, you are going to call whoever you have positioned near that building. You are going to do it on a phone you use for exactly this kind of communication. And you're going to tell them to leave. Not in an hour. Now. I want those vehicles gone before the next traffic signal I pass through. And if I don't, Park said, it was the first time in 7 years of their professional relationship that Park Jun-seok had said, if I don't to him. Tae-hyun noted this. Then tomorrow morning, he said, I will walk into the Monday briefing and I will go through the Incheon distribution network line by line, because I have suspected for 4 months that the customs problem there is not about a customs official, and I have been allowing it because I have been, perhaps, too tolerant of people managing situations I didn't ask them to manage. The line was quiet. The vehicles will be gone, Park said. Good, Tae-hyun said. And Jun-seok? Yes. My son is not a situation. He is not a variable. He is not a disruption to be managed. If you need me to repeat that for clarity, I will, but I will only repeat it once. He ended the call. The car moved through the signal. On the other side of it, Tae-hyun lowered the phone into his lap and looked at the city outside the window and felt the specific, unfamiliar texture of a decision made from something other than calculation. He called Elias. Elias answered on the third ring, voice slightly cautious in the way of someone who doesn't recognize the incoming number but picks up anyway. It's Tae-hyun, he said. A moment. I know, Elias said. There were men outside your building, Tae-hyun said. They're leaving. They won't be back. I want you to know what I just did about it. The silence on the line had a different quality from any silence that had existed between them before. Who sent them? Elias said. Someone in my organization who misunderstood the boundaries of his authority, Tae-hyun said. That misunderstanding has been corrected. Has it? Yes. Another silence. You called me directly, Elias said. Not through the attorney. Yes, Tae-hyun said. The agreement specifies in-person meetings require attorney coordination, Tae-hyun said. Phone calls to inform my son that men have been positioned outside his building are not addressed by the agreement. I made a judgment call. There was a pause, and in the pause Tae-hyun thought he heard, or perhaps constructed from hope, which was a thing he was beginning to allow himself in small, controlled doses. Something that was not quite the same as the careful watchfulness Elias had carried in all their previous interactions. Okay, Elias said. Okay, Tae-hyun said. I'll tell my mother, Elias said. I assumed you would, Tae-hyun said. That's also appropriate. The call ended. The car moved through Gangnam and Tae-hyun sat in the back seat and turned his phone over in his hands and felt, in the precise geography of his chest, something he had no current name for that was neither comfortable nor entirely unwelcome. But elsewhere in the city, in an office he would not have been able to pinpoint on a map without effort, Yoon Se-rin sat at her desk and looked at a notification on a secure device that told her the surveillance vehicles had been pulled. And she did not pick up the phone. She sat very still for a very long time, and then she opened a different drawer, a different file. 20 years old, meticulously preserved, because a woman who had spent 20 years maintaining a structure built on fabricated evidence understood that the most dangerous thing she could do was stop maintaining it. She looked at the documents inside. She began to think about what came next. Yoon Se-rin did not sleep that night either. She sat at her desk until 2 a.m. with the file open in front of her, and she went through every document the way a surgeon goes through a patient's chart before an operation that has already been scheduled, not looking for new information, but confirming the integrity of what was already there. The forged financial records, the fabricated wire transfers between Naomi's account and Choi Hyun-jae's shell company, the 3 witness statements, each signed by men who had since disappeared into ordinary lives far from Seoul, men who had been paid well enough to stay quiet and had done exactly that for 20 years. The documents were intact. That was not the problem. The problem was that Tae-hyun had pulled the surveillance vehicles. The problem was the phone call to Elias. The problem was the specific quality of his voice in Monday's meeting when he had said, "My son," not the boy, not the situation, not a disruption to be managed. "My son," with the flat, absolute weight of a man who had made a decision about where a thing lived in his internal hierarchy and was done renegotiating its position. She had seen Tae-hyun make that kind of decision before. It never went back. She closed the file. She put it in the drawer. She sat in the dark of her office for a long time after the desk lamp went off, and she thought about 20 years, about the specific architecture of what she had built and how many load-bearing walls it had, and she began, methodically, to plan. The following Wednesday, Se-rin arrived at Park Jun-seok's secondary office, not the official suite on the 14th floor of the Kang Foundation Tower, but the smaller space in a building in Yeouido that existed in Park's own name rather than the organization's, at 11 in the morning. She did not call ahead. She had a key because they had been conducting a particular variety of professional relationship for 6 years that had never been given a name and did not need one, being defined entirely by its function. Park was already there. He was standing at the window when she came in, jacket off, sleeves rolled, a cup of coffee going cold on the desk behind him. He turned when he heard the door. "I figured it was you," he said. "The vehicles," she said. "He found out within 4 hours." Park's jaw was tight. "I don't know who told him. Someone in the deployment chain." "It doesn't matter who told him," Se-rin said. She set her bag down and sat without being invited to, which was the kind of thing she only did in rooms where she had assessed the power balance and found it even or in her favor. "What matters is what he said when he called you. He said the boy was not a situation." Park turned back to the window. "He said he would only repeat it once. And the Incheon thing. He knows about Incheon." Se-rin was quiet for a moment. "How much does he know?" "Enough to use it as a lever. Not enough to have moved on it already, or he would have." Park picked up the cold coffee and then put it down without drinking. "He's been tolerating it. He said so. That means he knows. He's chosen to wait, and he pulled it out when he needed something to push with." He turned from the window. "He's sharper when he's emotional. Did you know that? Most men get stupider. He gets sharper." "I know that," Se-rin said. "Then you know what we're dealing with." She looked at him. "What we're dealing with is a man who has spent 4 weeks in cafes with a 19-year-old he feels responsible for, and who is now operating with a particular kind of motivation that he hasn't had in 20 years. She paused. "That kind of motivation makes people review things they had previously decided not to review." Park was looking at her now with the full weight of his attention. "The original evidence," he said. "He signed a document requiring him to provide access to original documentation within 30 days, Se-rin said. "That deadline is in 12 days. The room was very quiet. "When he looks at it," Park said. "He won't find anything wrong with it," Se-rin said. "I made sure of that 20 years ago. But a man who is now motivated, specifically motivated, looks at documents differently than a man who accepted them without wanting to examine them." She crossed her legs. "He looks for different things." "So we need him to look at them before he's ready," Park said, "while he's still balancing. We need him to look at them and find something that redirects his attention," Se-rin said. "Something that isn't us." Park was quiet for a long moment. "The journalist," he said, "the Hankyora woman. Elias has been meeting with her. That's already in motion." Se-rin picked up her bag. If Tae-hyun believes Naomi brought a journalist into this, that the meetings with his son were partly a setup to feed a reporter access to organizational information, his attention goes somewhere other than 20-year-old forgeries. He won't believe it without evidence. "Then we'll give him evidence," Se-rin said. She stood. She moved to the door. She had her hand on the frame when Park said, "Se-rin." She turned. "If this goes wrong," Park said, "we don't both go down. We agreed to that." She looked at him for a moment. His face was doing the thing it did when he was trying to project steadiness over the texture of something that was not quite fear, but lived in the same neighborhood. "It won't go wrong," she said. She left. Tae-hyun's legal team delivered the documentation package to the attorney on page 3 of the agreement on day 28 of the 30-day window. 4 large archival boxes. Original records, or what had been presented to him as original records 20 years ago. financial ledgers, communication logs, the 3 witness affidavits, a chain of custody record that Seyrin had constructed with the kind of meticulous care that she brought to everything she didn't want examined. He did not read through all of it before it was sent. He had not been able to make himself do that, and he had not examined why. And Seyrin had supervised the packaging herself, which was normal. She was chief legal consultant, document management was her domain, and Tae-hyun had let it be normal because he had 12 other things demanding his attention, and because there was a version of himself that still, even now, did not want to look at what he had used to justify what he had done. That was the version Seyrin was counting on. But she had miscalculated one thing. Naomi had spent 19 years preparing for this. The attorney on page 3 had a forensic document specialist in his network, a woman who had worked for 15 years in financial crime investigation before going private, who had a particular expertise in identifying document aging techniques. She spent 6 days with the archival boxes. She used chemical testing on paper stock. She dated ink compounds. She ran the financial records against the actual transaction histories of the institutions involved, pulling records from institutions that had no connection to the Kang organization and therefore no incentive to produce anything other than accurate information. On the morning of the 6th day, she called the attorney. The attorney called Naomi. Naomi called the cafe in Mappo and told them she needed the corner table for Thursday at 10. Taehyun arrived at the cafe on Thursday at 10 minutes to 10. He had told himself he was arriving early to settle, to have coffee, to be a person sitting at a table rather than a person arriving at a situation. He sat down and ordered coffee and held it and watched the door. Naomi came in at 3 minutes past 10, alone. He registered the absence of Elias before she sat down. It sat in his chest differently than he expected. Not relief, not alarm, but something closer to disappointment, which was information about himself that he absorbed without comment. She sat across from him. She put a folder on the table between them. She did not push it toward him. She left it in the middle, equidistant, and she put both hands flat on the table on her side of it, and she looked at him with the expression he had come to recognize as her working face, contained, precise, generating no more signal than she intended to generate. "Open it," she said. He opened the folder. Inside were 12 pages of the forensic specialist's report, tabbed and annotated. He read the summary at the front. He turned to the first tab. He read the chemical dating results on the paper stock for 3 of the financial records, which placed their actual production date as no earlier than 3 years after the transactions they purported to document. He read this twice. He turned to the second tab. The transaction record cross-referencing. The records Seyrin had presented showed a wire transfer from Naomi's account to Choi Hyun-jae's shell company on a date that the receiving institution's actual records showed no incoming transfer matching that description, amount, or origin. He turned to the third tab. He stopped reading and set the pages down on the table and put both of his hands on top of them. His breathing was level. He had made it level. Underneath the level, something was happening that had a geological quality. Not fast, not loud, but shifting weight that had been load-bearing for 20 years. "When did you get this?" he said. 6 days ago, Naomi said. "I've been sitting with it." "Why?" "Because I wanted to be sure," she said, "and because I needed to decide what I was going to do with it. Whether I was going to walk into a room with a lawyer and a judge and hand it over. Whether I was going to give it to the journalist." A pause. "Whether I was going to bring it to you first." He looked at her. "Why did you bring it to me first?" he said. "Because Elias asked me to," she said. The table was very small. The cafe noise moved around them, indifferent and continuous. "He asked you to give me the chance to respond before you move," Tae-hyun said. "He's 19 years old," Naomi said, and there was something in her voice when she said it. Not softness, exactly, but a grain of something that wasn't present when she talked about anything other than her son. "And he has more decency than anyone in your world, including you." And he said, "Give him a chance to make it right before you burn it down." She stopped. "I disagreed, but I raised him to make his own calls." Tae-hyun looked down at the folder. He thought about Seyrin. He thought about 25 years. He thought about the specific, unexamined trust he had given her. Not the trust of affection, not even the trust of genuine verification, but the trust of a man who needed a particular thing to be true, and had handed the task of maintaining that truth to a person he trusted to protect his interests, which were not the same thing as justice, had never been the same thing as justice, and which he had, apparently, given her 20 years of latitude to confuse with it. He thought about Park Jun-seok, the surveillance vehicles, the vehicles that had been near his son's building for 7 hours before he'd found out. The careful way Park had said the goal was to clarify the situation. "Tell me what you want," he said to Naomi. "I want what I've always wanted," she said. "The truth, publicly. Not in a deposition, not in a settlement. Publicly." She held his gaze. "There's a gala in 3 weeks. The Kang Foundation Gala. 700 people, government officials. Every major media outlet in Seoul will have cameras there. You want me to confess at my own foundation gala," he said. "I want you to tell the truth," Naomi said, "in a room full of people who helped you build what you built, so that they understand what it was built on." She paused. "That's the second condition. You sign it tonight, through our attorneys, by midnight." He looked at her. "And if I don't," he said, "then tomorrow morning I walk into the offices of the Hankyora with this folder, and I sit down with a journalist who has been working on your organization for 8 months, and I give her the rest of what she needs." Naomi's voice was entirely level. "And the truth comes out anyway, just without you controlling a single second of how it does." The cafe moved around them. Taehyun sat with his hands on the folder and felt the full weight of the choice in his body, not abstractly, not strategically, but physically, the way a man feels the weight of a structure he's been holding up when his arms have finally decided they're done. He thought about Elias, about give him a chance to make it right, about a 19-year-old who had every reason to want him destroyed and had instead asked his mother to walk into a cafe and give him a choice. He picked up his phone. He called his attorney. "Draw up an amendment to the agreement," he said. "Add a clause. The Kang Foundation Gala, 3 weeks from Saturday. A public statement. I'll give you the language in the next hour." He paused. "Get it to the other side by midnight." He ended the call. He put the phone face down on the table. He looked at Naomi. She was looking back at him, and for the first time since the ballroom, for the first time in 20 years, something in her face moved. Not softness, not forgiveness. Something more complicated than either of those. The expression of a person who has been carrying a weapon for a very long time and has just been told she can set it down and doesn't quite know yet how to open her hands. 3 weeks, she said. 3 weeks, he said. She picked up the folder from the table. She stood. She looked at him for one more moment. "Elias will be at the next meeting," she said. "Saturday, same place." She left. Tae-hyun sat at the table for a long time after she was gone. He drank the coffee, which had gone cold. He looked out the cafe window at the Mapo street, at the ordinary Thursday morning moving past, buses and pedestrians and delivery scooters weaving through each other with the practiced indifference of a city that had its own momentum and did not require his participation to maintain it. His phone buzzed. He looked at it. A message from a number he recognized as one of Se-rin's secondary contact lines. Not her main phone, the relay line she used for sensitive communications. The message was 3 words. "We need to talk." He looked at it. He typed back, "My office, 4 o'clock." Then he put the phone in his jacket pocket, next to the place where his chest had been doing things he had no adequate language for since the night a tall woman in black silk had walked through his ballroom doors and changed the structural integrity of everything he believed he had built on solid ground. He paid for the coffee. He walked out into the Thursday morning. And in the Yeouido office, Park Jun-seok looked at a message on his own phone, a message from Se-rin that said simply, "He signed," and felt the floor of the last 7 years of careful patience shift under him in a way that had nothing to do with the building's foundation and everything to do with the fact that the man he had been waiting to replace had just chosen, incomprehensibly, to hand a woman he had wronged the key to the room where every secret Kang Tae-hyun had ever buried was. Se-rin was already in his office when he arrived at 4 o'clock, not waiting outside, not in the anteroom with his assistant. Inside, seated in one of the 2 chairs facing his desk, with her coat folded across her lap, and her hands resting on top of it, and her face arranged into the expression she had worn for 25 years, in rooms where she needed to project a calm she was manufacturing in real time. Taehyun's assistant, a young man named Dae-won, who had worked for him for 3 years and had developed the specific professional reflex of someone who understood that his employer's reactions to unexpected things were worth paying close attention to, looked up from his desk in the anteroom with an expression that communicated he had tried to stop her, and had been unsuccessful, and was prepared to accept whatever consequence followed from that failure. Taehyun looked at him. "Hold everything," he said. "Close the door behind me." He went in. He did not sit. He walked to his desk, set down his jacket, and stood behind his chair with both hands resting on the back of it, looking at Se-rin across the width of the room. She looked back. The afternoon light from the window was coming in at an angle that hit the left side of her face and left the right in shadow. And in that divided light she looked for a moment like two different people. The one he had known, and the one he was only now beginning to understand he hadn't. "You reviewed the documents before they were sent," he said. "I always review documents before they're sent," she said. "That's my function." "That's not what I'm asking." "I know what you're asking." She did not look away. "And I'm telling you that the documents I reviewed were the same documents that have existed for 20 years. I don't know what a forensic specialist told Naomi Brooks. I know what I know." He looked at her for a long moment. "You're going to sit in that chair," he said, "and tell me that the evidence you brought me 20 years ago was genuine." "I'm going to sit in this chair," she said, "and tell you that the evidence I brought you was what it was. I compiled it. I presented it. You reviewed it and made a decision." A pause. "You made a decision, Taehyun. That was yours." The room was very quiet. He came around the desk. Not quickly. He moved the way he moved when he was controlling something in himself that wanted to move faster. And he pulled the second chair around so it was facing hers directly. No desk between them, 4 feet of open carpet. And he sat down and leaned forward with his elbows on his knees and looked at her from that distance. "Tell me about Choi Hyun-jae," he said. Something moved in her face. Fast, gone before it fully arrived. "He was an operative working for the Daejeon faction," she said. "The financial connections between his accounts and Naomi's were documented in—" "Choi Hyun-jae died 11 years ago," Taehyun said. "Liver failure. I know this because I reviewed his file when the Daejeon faction came under the Accord. His operational history was part of the integration documentation." He paused. "There is no record in that file of him ever having held the account your documents attributed to him. The account number your records showed as his receiving account was registered to a logistics company in Busan that had no connection to the Daejeon faction, no connection to Choi, and no connection to any rival organization." He kept his eyes on her face. "I know this because I had someone pull those records this morning, after I read the summary of what Naomi's specialist found." "Yipas." Serin's hands on her folded coat were very still. "The company," Taehyun said, "was dissolved 14 months after Naomi's arrest. Its registered director was a man who had worked for 6 years prior to the company's establishment as a paralegal for a legal firm in Seocho district." He let the next sentence sit for 1 full second before he delivered it. "Your father's firm." The light from the window moved slightly as a cloud passed outside. The shadow side of Serin's face shifted. She did not speak. "How long," Taehyun said, "did it take you to build it?" Her jaw moved once. "Serin?" "8 months," she said. The words came out quietly. Not confession. There was no relief in the sound of them. No release. They came out the way a structural element comes out when the thing holding it in place is finally removed, because there was nothing left to hold them. 8 months, he said. "You were going to make her a partner," Serin said. Her voice was still level, but it had changed texture. The manufactured calm was still there, but something underneath it was pressing against it from the inside. Not just personally, structurally. You were going to bring her into the organizational decision-making. You were talking about giving her access to the financial architecture, everything you'd built. She stopped. She was going to know everything. She was going to know everything, Taehyun said, because I trusted her. She was going to know everything, Serin said, and she had no reason to stay silent. She had a different relationship to what you were building than we did. She had a different relationship to the law, to consequences. She was going to be inside the structure with full knowledge and no real commitment to protecting it. And you could not see that because... She stopped again. "Because what?" he said. Because you were in love with her, Seirin said. And you had never been in love with anything before, and you didn't know what it did to your judgment. The afternoon light held still. Taehyun sat with the words and felt them settle into him in layers. The admission, the reasoning, the specific architecture of what she had believed she was doing. Protecting the organization, protecting the structure, protecting him from a decision she had decided, on her own authority, he was not equipped to make clearly. She was pregnant, he said. I didn't know that when I started, Seirin said. I found out 4 months in. And you continued. She looked at him. And you continued, he said again. Not louder. Just with more weight behind each word, pressing them down into the space between them. I had already... She stopped. Started again. The infrastructure was already in place. The witnesses had already been... You continued, he said, knowing she was pregnant, knowing that what you were building would send a pregnant woman to prison. Seirin's mouth closed. She looked at her hands on the coat. For the first time in 25 years of knowing her face, he watched something in it break open. Not dramatically, not with tears or visible collapse, but with the specific small fracture of a person who has been holding a thing sealed for a very long time and has just felt the seal give. I told myself, she said very quietly, that the child would be provided for, that the prison system had medical facilities, that you would... Stopped. That I would what? He said. She didn't answer. That I would eventually find out the truth, he said. That I would investigate. That I would read her letters. He felt his voice wanting to change, and he kept it level by force. I didn't read her letters. No, Seirin said. How many did she send? I don't know the exact number. How many did you intercept? A pause. 14, she said. He stood up. He walked to the window. He stood with his back to her and his hands at his sides and looked out at the Seoul afternoon. The traffic, the buildings, the ordinary machinery of a city that had been running underneath everything he had done for 30 years without caring about any of it. And he stood there for a long time without speaking. 14 letters. Naomi in prison. Pregnant, then with a newborn, then with an infant, writing letters to a man who had sent her there. 14 times writing, 14 times believing, or perhaps after a while no longer believing, but continuing anyway because there was nothing else to do with the words. 14 letters that had arrived somewhere, been read by someone, and been made to disappear. He thought about what a person writes in 14 letters from prison. He could not finish the thought. Where are they? He said. His voice, from where he was standing, sounded like it was coming from somewhere else. Seirin was quiet. Seirin. They don't exist anymore, she said. I destroyed them. He put one hand flat against the window glass. The glass was cold. The cold moved up through his palm and into his wrist, and he focused on it, the specific physical sensation of it, because it was clean and immediate and asked nothing of him. He heard Seirin stand behind him. I know what this is, she said. I know what you're going to do, the gala, the public statement. You're going to give her everything she asked for, and you're going to burn down 20 years of what we built because of a 19-year-old boy who has your face and because she walked into your ballroom in a black dress and you felt something you didn't expect to feel. Her voice had found a new quality, not pleading, something harder than pleading, the tone of a person making a final argument. Think about what you're actually dismantling. Think about every person whose position depends on the structure holding. Think about what a public confession does to the Accord, to the Incheon operation, to the 47 families who... Get out of my office, he said. He said it quietly. Seirin stopped speaking. If you are in this building tomorrow morning, he said, still facing the window, I will have you removed. If you contact Park Jun-seok tonight, I will know about it by morning, and I will consider it a declaration. He took his hand off the glass. You have until midnight to decide whether you're going to do this quietly or whether you're going to make me do it loudly. I don't recommend loudly. You know enough about how I handle loud. He heard her pick up her coat. He heard her walk to the door. 25 years, she said from behind him. I know, he said. The door opened. The door closed. He stood at the window for a long time. Chas. He called Elias that night at 9. Elias answered on the second ring. I know about the letters, Taehyun said. I found out today. Your mother sent me 14 letters from prison. I never received them. I need you to know that." The silence on the line was the kind that breathes. Taehyun could hear the slight shift of it, the quality of someone receiving something and processing it in real time. "Does she know you know?" Elias said. "Not yet. I'll tell her Saturday." "Okay?" "Elias." He stopped. He had not planned what he was going to say after the name. The name had come out as its own thing, carrying its own weight, and now he was standing in his apartment at 9 o'clock at night with the phone against his ear and the city spread out below the window and a 19-year-old on the other end of the line who had done nothing to deserve any of the specific inheritance of damage that Taehyun's decisions had produced. "I know," Elias said, quietly. "You don't know what I was going to say." "You were going to say you're sorry," Elias said, "and that it doesn't cover it, and you were going to say it anyway because you didn't know what else to do with it." A pause. "Am I wrong?" Taehyun closed his eyes. "No," he said. "You're not wrong." "Okay," Elias said. "Saturday." The call ended. Taehyun put the phone down. He went to the kitchen. He poured water. He drank it standing at the counter in the dark kitchen of his apartment, which was large and well-appointed and had been decorated by someone he had paid to make it look like a place a person lived rather than a space a person occupied between operations, and which had, despite those efforts, always felt like the latter. He thought about Se-rin. He thought about midnight. He thought about whether she would be quiet or loud. But she was neither. At 11:47, 13 minutes before his deadline, Taehyun's security chief sent him a message with a photograph attached. The photograph had been taken by a camera in the lobby of the Kang Foundation Tower, time-stamped 40 minutes earlier. It showed Se-rin exiting through the main doors with a leather document case under her arm, the kind she used for archival materials, wider and stiffer than her regular briefcase. He stared at the photograph. He called his security chief. "What did she take out of the building?" he said. "We're pulling the office camera footage now," the man said. "But the case, the dimensions match the storage cabinet in her office, the one with the secondary lock." The secondary lock. Taehyun had known about the cabinet, had known it existed, known it had a lock he didn't have the key to, known that Se-rin kept materials in it that she described as sensitive legal documentation for ongoing matters requiring compartmentalization. He had accepted this the way he had accepted everything about Se-rin for 25 years, with the trust of a man who had decided she was part of the structure rather than a person who could act independently of it. "Where did she go?" he said. "The car went to Yeouido," the security chief said. "We lost it in the parking structure under the Yeouido IFC, Parks building." Taehyun set the phone down on the counter and stood in his dark kitchen and understood with complete and sudden clarity that he had miscalculated. He had told Se-rin she had until midnight. He had expected her to go home, to sit with it, to calculate her own odds and arrive, as she always had, at the conclusion that her best position was alignment with his. Instead, she had gone to Park, which meant she had already made the calculation before she walked into his office at 4 o'clock, which meant the conversation had not been an attempt to defend herself or to reason with him. It had been reconnaissance. She had come to his office to confirm exactly how much he knew, and she had gotten what she came for, and she had walked out with it and gone directly to Park Jun-seok, and whatever was in that leather document case was now in a building in Yeouido. He called Park. The phone rang 7 times. No answer. He called again. 7 rings. Voicemail. He stood very still in the dark kitchen and breathed slowly and thought about the document case and what was inside it, and what a woman who had spent 20 years maintaining a structure built on forgeries would keep in a cabinet with a lock he didn't have the key to. Insurance. She had kept insurance, not just against him, against everyone who knew about the original deception. Documentation of what had been done, preserved in a form that could, in the right hands and the right context, be directed at anyone, including Taehyun himself, including the full scope of what the organization had done in the 20 years since Naomi's conviction, the years when Se-rin had been inside the structure with full access and a very good memory and a woman's understanding that the powerful men around her would, eventually, need to be managed rather than simply served. His phone buzzed. Not a call. A message. From a number he didn't recognize, a clean number, no prior contact, the kind of number that gets used once. He opened it. The message was 4 words and a file attachment. The 4 words were, "Before you do anything." He opened the attachment. It was a document. 43 pages. He scrolled through the first 10 quickly, getting the shape of it, and then stopped scrolling and stood very still because the shape of it was not what he had expected and was considerably worse. It was not a record of Seyrin's forgeries. It was a record of his, not the organization's. His, personally. Decisions he had made, orders he had given, financial movements he had authorized in a period spanning 14 years, documented with the kind of granular specificity that only comes from someone who had been present for those decisions, who had been in the room, who had been trusted enough to know the details and careful enough to write them down. Seyrin had been writing them down. For 14 years, she had been building a record of everything Taehyun had done that could not survive public exposure. Not as blackmail. She had never used it, had never threatened it, had kept it in a locked cabinet in her office for 14 years without activating it. It had existed, he understood now, as the ultimate insurance policy. The guarantee that even if everything else failed, she had something that would make his destruction her leverage and not simply her consequence. The message had come from her. She was showing him the document before she gave it to anyone else. His phone buzzed again. Same number. The gala is in 3 weeks. So is my patience. Choose carefully. He read the message twice. He set the phone face down on the counter. He stood in the dark kitchen of his apartment and felt the full weight of what had just happened settle into his body. Not shock exactly, because shock requires the element of the impossible, and nothing about this was impossible. Everything about it was the logical conclusion of choices he had made over a long period of time. But something close to it. The specific physical experience of a man who has been operating under a load-bearing assumption that has just been removed and is now feeling the structure shift around. He stood in the dark kitchen for 11 minutes. He knew it was 11 minutes because the clock on the microwave read 11:51 when he picked up his phone again, and it had read 11:40 when Seyrin's second message arrived. And in those 11 minutes he had not moved, had not turned on a light, had not done anything except breathe and think and let the full architecture of what he was facing assemble itself in his mind with the cold precision that had always been his most reliable tool and that he had spent the last 4 weeks feeling soften at the edges in ways he had not properly accounted for. He picked up the phone. He called his attorney, not the organizational attorney, his personal one, a man named Seo, who had handled Taehyun's private legal affairs for 18 years and who answered his phone at midnight without complaint because that was what he was paid to do. "I need an emergency injunction," Taehyun said. "Document theft. An employee removed proprietary materials from a secured office without authorization tonight. I need to establish the legal record before morning." "What kind of materials?" Seo said. "The kind that need to be characterized correctly before anyone else characterizes them," Taehyun said. "Can you have something filed by 6 a.m.? "I can have something filed by 4, Seo said. "Do it." He ended the call. Then he sat down on the kitchen floor. Not because his legs gave, they didn't, but because standing in the dark felt suddenly like a performance with no audience, and he was tired of performances, had been tired of them for longer than he had admitted, and the kitchen floor was cold and hard and honest in the way that nothing else in the apartment was. He sat with his back against the cabinet and the phone in both hands and the 43-page document open on the screen, and he read it. All of it. He read his own history in Seyrin's precise, unsentimental prose, and he did not look away from any of it, because looking away was the thing he had done for 20 years, and looking away was what had brought him to a kitchen floor at midnight with a blackmail document on his phone and a gala in 3 weeks. And a son who had his face, and a woman who had spent 19 years preparing to dismantle him. And the only thing he had left that was worth anything was the ability to look at the truth of himself without flinching. He read all 43 pages. Then he called Naomi. She answered on the 4th ring, voice alert in the particular way of someone who sleeps lightly and has learned to come fully awake fast. "Something happened," he said. A pause. "Are you safe?" she said. The question surprised him. Not its content, it was a reasonable question given the context, but the speed of it, the instinct of it. She had asked before she had decided whether to ask, and he filed that without comment. "I'm safe," he said. "Seyrin has documentation of the organization, Of me specifically. 14 years of records. She left the building tonight with it and went to park. She sent me a copy 40 minutes ago. A warning. He paused. A threat. The line was quiet. She's going to use it against the gala, Naomi said. Not a question. Yes. Can she? If she gets it to the right people before the gala, yes. She can reframe everything on my confession becomes one criminal exposing another to save himself. The forensic evidence about the forgeries gets buried under the weight of what she has on me. He stopped. Everything Elias asked for, the truth coming out in a way that means something. She can make it mean nothing. He heard Naomi breathing on the other end of the line, steady, thinking. Does Park know what's in it? She said. I assume she showed him enough. Then Park is her leverage on you and you're her leverage on Park, Naomi said. She's positioned herself between two people who both have reasons to move against her and made herself necessary to both of them. Yes, he said. She's good, Naomi said. She's very good, Taehyun said. She's been very good for 25 years, and I let her be very good inside my organization because it was useful, and I didn't examine what else it was. Another silence. What do you need? Naomi said. He hadn't expected that either, or perhaps he had at some level because he had called her, which was its own answer to a question he hadn't consciously formed. I need 24 hours, he said. I need to find out exactly what she has and where it is. If it only exists in that document case, I have options. If she's already made copies and distributed them to protected locations, then you have a different problem, Naomi said. Yes. I have someone, Naomi said. She worked financial crime investigation for 15 years before she went private. She's the one who dated your documents. She has contacts in the prosecutor's office, in the financial crimes unit, in 2 separate intelligence agencies. If Seren has been building a record for 14 years, there may be a trail, accounts she used, communication channels. Someone who knows where to look might find the distribution points before she activates them. He was quiet for a moment. You'd do that, he said. You'd use your resources to help me. I'd use my resources, Naomi said, to make sure the truth comes out the way it's supposed to come out, which is at the gala, from you, on your feet, in front of cameras. A pause. Not buried under Serin's version of events. He absorbed this. I'll send you her name by morning, Naomi said. Get some sleep. I won't sleep, he said. I know, she said. Get some anyway. The line went dead. He sat on the kitchen floor for a little while longer. Then he got up, turned on the light, and went to work. The next 72 hours moved at a speed and density that stripped away everything non-essential. The forensic investigator Naomi sent him, a woman named Yu Hana, small and precise, and with the manner of someone who found most people's attempts at opacity mildly amusing, arrived at his personal attorney's office at 7 in the morning. She asked for 3 things: Serin's full professional history, access to the Kang Foundation's outgoing communication logs for the past 6 months, and a list of every external legal firm Serin had consulted in a professional capacity over the past 2 years. By noon, she had identified 4 digital dead drop points, encrypted file repositories registered to shell accounts, that Serin had been using for document storage. By 3 in the afternoon, she had confirmed that copies of the 43-page document had been uploaded to 2 of them within the previous 18 hours. She had not yet sent them anywhere. She was waiting, Hana assessed, for a response from Taehyun that he had not yet given. She expected a call, Hana said, seated across from him in the attorney's conference room with her laptop open and the careful neutrality of a professional who had stopped being surprised by what powerful people did to each other. By now, she sent the document at midnight. It's been 15 hours. She expected you to call and negotiate. I didn't call, Taehyun said. Hyun. She's going to take that as a signal, Hana said. She'll start moving pieces. I'd give her another 6 hours before she contacts someone outside your network. Who would she contact? He said. Depends on what she wants. Hana pulled up something on her laptop. If she wants protection, she goes to a prosecutor she already has a relationship with and hands them the document as a cooperation offering. If she wants leverage, she goes to one of the rival factions, Daegu, possibly, or the Busan Group, and sells the information. If she wants, she paused. If she wants the gala to not happen, she goes to the press. Taehyun looked at the laptop screen. The dead drop repositories. The digital architecture of a woman who had been quietly building her exit strategy for 14 years while sitting 3 offices down from him. "Can you take the repositories down?" he said. "Not without leaving a trace that creates its own legal problem," Hannah said. "And she'll have local copies. The case Park has in Yowido." "I need to know what Park is going to do," he said. "That," Hannah said, "is a different kind of problem than I solve." He drove to Yowido himself. He did not tell his security chief. He did not bring anyone. He took his own car, a civilian vehicle, and he drove through the Seoul afternoon traffic with both hands on the wheel and the particular focused calm of a man who has reduced the situation to its essential variables and is moving toward the most direct one. Park's building lobby. Elevator. 14th floor, the official suite, because whatever Park was doing today, he would be doing it from behind the desk of his legitimate authority and not in the secondary office, which was where he went when he wanted to be hard to find. Tae-hyun knew this because he knew Park the way you know a person you have worked alongside for 7 years. Not deeply, not truly, but functionally, the knowledge of patterns. The receptionist outside Park's suite was a woman who had been in that position for 4 years and who looked up when Tae-hyun walked in and went very briefly still in the way that people go still when the situation in front of them is above their pay grade in a direction they had not anticipated. "Is he in?" Tae-hyun said. She looked at the phone. She looked at him. "I can check if—" "Don't," he said. "I'll go in." He opened the door. Park was at his desk. He was on his phone, turned slightly away toward the window, and he heard the door and turned and saw Tae-hyun, and the phone came down from his ear with the slow, deliberate movement of a man buying time while his body catches up to his mind. "I'll call you back," he said into the phone. He ended it. He stood up. They looked at each other across the office. Park's desk was large, dark wood, the kind of desk that announces itself as an object of authority. He had chosen it himself when the office had been set up, and Tae-hyun had noted the choice at the time as information about Park's relationship to the concept of succession and had filed it without comment. "Sit down," Tae-hyun said. "This is my office," Park said. "Sit down, Jun-seok." Something moved in Park's face at the use of his given name. They used surnames in professional contexts, always had. And after a moment he sat. Tae-hyun did not. He stood in front of the desk and put both hands in his coat pockets and looked at Park with the specific, undecorated attention he had used in rooms like this for 30 years. "The document case," Tae-hyun said. "I don't— Where is it?" Park's jaw worked. "In the secondary office," he said. "Is it still intact?" "Yes." "Have you read it?" "Serin showed me—" "Have you read all of it?" Tae-hyun said. Park stopped. "No," he said. "She showed me selected pages." "Selected pages," Tae-hyun said. He let that sit for a moment. "She showed you the pages she wanted you to see. You understand that, yes. She showed you exactly enough to make you feel that your interests were aligned with hers." Park's face was doing something complicated. "Your interests," Tae-hyun said, "are not aligned with hers. Your interest is in the organization continuing to function. Her interest is in not going to prison." He paused. "Those are different interests. The first one requires the organization surviving the next 3 weeks. The second one requires everything we've built to burn before anyone can examine the foundation." "You're the one burning it," Park said. His voice had an edge to it now. Not quite anger, but the heat that precedes anger in a man who has been patient for a long time and has recently lost confidence in the return on that patience. "You're the one who signed her agreement. You're the one who's planning to stand up at the gala and tell the truth," Tae-hyun said, "and destroy everything." "No," Tae-hyun said, "and destroy the lie. The things built on the lie, those fall. The things that can hold weight on honest ground, those survive." He looked at Park directly. "I know you don't believe that. I know you've spent 7 years building your position on the assumption that you were inheriting what exists. I'm telling you that what exists cannot hold. It was built on a fabrication 20 years ago, and every year since has added weight to a structure with a compromised foundation, and the only question now is whether it comes down in a way we control or a way we don't." Park was breathing harder than he had been when Tae-hyun walked in. "You don't have the right," Park said, "to make that decision unilaterally, for everyone inside the structure." "I built the structure," Tae-hyun said. We built it, Park said, louder. 7 years. I have given 7 years to... You have given 7 years to positioning yourself to take it, Tae-hyun said. That's not the same thing. The office went sharp and silent. Park stood up, both hands on the desk. He was a large man, and the posture was meant to use that. And Tae-hyun looked at it and felt nothing that resembled fear and everything that resembled exhaustion. Not the exhaustion of weakness, but the exhaustion of a man who has been doing the same performance for 30 years and has recently discovered the audience has changed. The case? Tae-hyun said. Give it to me. And if I don't, the second time in 2 weeks. The same phrase. The same question. But this time it landed differently because this time Tae-hyun was not in a car with city traffic between them, and this time he had spent 72 hours reducing the situation to its essential variables, and Park Jun-seok was one of those variables. Then I go to the gala in 3 weeks, Tae-hyun said, and I stand on that stage, and I tell the truth about Naomi, and I tell the truth about Serin, and I tell the truth about the organization, and when the investigation begins, and it will begin, Jun-seok, that is not a question of if. I tell the investigators everything I know about the operational structure, including the 7 years during which you were vice chairman and had full knowledge of and participated in Churchin. That's a threat, Park said. It's a description, Tae-hyun said, of what happens if you choose the version of events where you and Si-rin are on the same side. He paused. Or, you give me the case, you come to the gala, you stand in that room and let the night happen. And when it's over, when the investigation begins, you are a man who cooperated rather than a man who obstructed. Park's hands on the desk were white at the knuckles. She has copies, he said. The case isn't all of it. I know that, Tae-hyun said. I'm handling that separately. How? That, Tae-hyun said, is my problem, not yours. Park stared at him. The office held the two of them in its expensive silence. Outside the window, the Han River moved through the afternoon light, gray-blue and indifferent, going where it had always gone. She came to me, Park said. His voice had changed. The heat was leaving it, not into cold, but into something that sounded uncomfortably like a man recalibrating. 2 days after the ceremony, she laid out the whole thing, what she had, what she could do with it. She made it sound... He stopped. She made it sound like the only logical response to what you were doing was to stop you. I know what she made it sound like, Tae-hyun said. I want to keep what I've built, Park said. Not angrily, almost quietly. I know that too, Tae-hyun said. If I give you the case, you give me the case, Tae-hyun said. Tonight, before midnight. He took his hands out of his pockets. And you don't contact Serin between now and the gala. Not once. Not for any reason. Park looked at him for a long moment. The look of a man doing arithmetic on things that could not quite be reduced to numbers. Assessing probability. Weighing the weight of 7 years of patient positioning against the weight of a wall he could see moving toward him in the dark. Tonight, Park said. Tonight, Tae-hyun said. He left the office. He walked to the elevator. He pressed the button and waited. And the elevator came and he got in and the doors closed and he stood in the elevator with his own reflection in the polished metal doors. And he looked at it, at the gray at his temples, at the lines, at the specific arrangement of a face that had been wearing composed for so long that composed had become its resting position. And he breathed. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out. A message from Hana. Serin contacted a journalist at Junggang Ilbo 40 minutes ago. Meeting requested for tomorrow morning. She has not yet confirmed it. Window, 12 hours. He stared at the message. The elevator opened on the lobby. He typed back, find out where she's staying tonight. He walked out of the building into the Yowido afternoon, and the wind off the river hit him cold across the face, and he stood on the sidewalk and felt the 12-hour window closing around the gala, and around Elias, and around Naomi, and around the one chance he had to make the truth mean something, instead of becoming another layer of noise in a city that had been burying its truths under noise for as long as anyone could. Hana found Serin at a serviced apartment in Mapo district. Not her own address, not anywhere connected to the organization. A clean address in someone else's name that had taken Hana 4 hours and 3 separate contact networks to locate. She sent Tae-hyun the address at 9:47 in the evening with a single additional line. She hasn't confirmed the morning meeting yet. Still a window. He sat with the address for 20 minutes. Then he drove there alone. The building was a mid-rise ordinary, the kind of place designed to be forgettable. He parked on the street and sat in the car and looked at the lit windows on the 7th floor. Hannah had given him the unit number, and thought about what he was doing and whether it was the right thing, and concluded that right and necessary were not always the same category, and that tonight he needed necessary. He called the unit from the building intercom. It rang 4 times. Then Serin's voice, tight and immediately alert. "Who is this?" "Come down," he said, "or I come up. Your choice." A long pause. "Lobby," she said. She came down in 7 minutes. She was dressed, not for sleep, which told him she had not been sleeping, had been sitting in that unit in her clothes, waiting for the shape of what came next to declare itself. She wore a dark sweater, and her face was stripped of the professional composure he had known for 25 years. Not dramatically, not collapsed, but thinner somehow, the underlying structure more visible, the way a building looks when its cladding comes off, and you can see the actual material of what it's made from. She looked at him across the lobby. He looked at her. Neither of them spoke for a moment. The lobby had a security desk with a young man behind it who was making the careful professional decision to find something on his computer deeply interesting. "The journalist," Taehyun said. "I haven't confirmed it," she said. "I know. That's why I'm here tonight instead of tomorrow morning." He took 2 steps toward her. Not threatening. He was not going to be threatening, had decided that in the car, because threatening Serin was the language of the organization, and he was trying, however clumsily, to speak a different language tonight. "I need you to listen to me." "I've been listening to you for 25 years, she said. "No," he said. "You've been managing me for 25 years. That's different." He stopped 2 feet from her. "I need you to actually listen, for 10 minutes, and then you make whatever decision you make." Her jaw was set. Her eyes were doing the rapid assessment thing they did when she was processing threat levels and escape vectors simultaneously. He recognized it. He had always recognized it, and had always categorized it as vigilance, professional acuity, the instinct of a good legal mind. He understood now that it was also fear, and had always been fear, and that he had failed to recognize it as fear because he had not been looking for it. 10 minutes, she said. They sat in a corner of the lobby, 2 chairs angled toward each other, the security guard's back a polite 40 feet away. "The 43 pages, Taehyun said. "I read all of it." She said nothing. "Some of it I remembered. Some of it I had categorized differently in my own record of events. Some of it—" He stopped. "Reorganized. Some of it I had not allowed myself to look at clearly until I read your version of it." He looked at his hands for a moment, then back at her. "You documented accurately. I want you to know I understand that. You didn't fabricate what you had on me. What you built against Naomi was fabrication. What you built on me was record-keeping." Something shifted in her face. "There's a difference," she said, carefully. "Yes," he said, "and the difference is what I'm here to talk about." He leaned forward slightly. "If you go to the journalist tomorrow, you hand her a document that buries the truth about Naomi under the truth about me. Both things become a single story, and the single story is about the organization and what it did and the woman who conspired with it, because that is how it will be framed, Serin. You spent 25 years inside the structure. Your name is on documents. Your signature is on decisions. If you hand that journalist 43 pages of what I did, she will spend 4 hours with it and call you back and tell you she needs 43 more pages about what you did. So, what? Serin was very still. "I'm not threatening you," he said. "I'm telling you how the story works. You hand them a weapon and they will find the end it points toward, and that end is not only me." She looked at him for a long time. The lobby air conditioning moved the air between them slowly. "What are you offering?" she said. "I'm not offering anything," he said. "I'm asking you to give me the 3 weeks. Let the gala happen. Let me stand on that stage and say what I have to say." He paused. "After that, the legal process begins. You'll have counsel. You'll have the right to make whatever arrangement you can with the prosecutor's office. I won't instruct anyone to obstruct that process, and I won't add to the weight against you beyond what the evidence already shows." "That's not immunity," she said. "No," he said. "It's not." Her mouth pressed together. She looked at the floor. He watched her face. The specific private face of a woman doing a calculation that had nothing to do with strategy and everything to do with the more fundamental arithmetic of what she had done and what it had cost and what remaining cost she was still capable of absorbing. "The letters," she said. "Yes," he said. "I know," she said, quietly. "I knew, even then, I knew what it meant." She looked up. "I told myself it was necessary. I told myself the structure required." She stopped. "You know what the worst part is? The part I couldn't put in any document because there was no way to write it down that didn't make it—" She stopped again. "Tell me," he said. "The worst part," Seren said, "is that I was right about the risk she posed. Not the betrayal. I fabricated the betrayal, but the risk. She would have changed you. She was already changing you. And the thing she was changing you into—" Her voice dropped. "It wasn't weaker. It was different. And different meant I didn't know how to predict it. And I had built 20 years of my own position on being able to predict you." The lobby was very quiet. "So you destroyed her," Taehyun said, "because she made you uncertain." Seren didn't answer. She didn't need to. He sat with it for a moment. The specific, unglamorous truth of it. Not a grand conspiracy born of ambition or ideology, but something smaller and more human and more devastating. A person who needed to control the variables in her world and remove the one she couldn't control. "The document case," he said. "Park is bringing it to me tonight. I need you to pull the copies from the repositories." She looked at him. "If I do that," she said, "I have nothing." "You have the 3 weeks I just described," he said. "You have a process instead of a war. You have the difference between a person who cooperated and a person who didn't." He held her gaze. "I know that's not what you built the last 14 years toward. I know you built toward leverage. I'm asking you to let the leverage go." A long silence. "And if I can't," she said. "Then you can't," he said. "And I go to the gala anyway. And whatever comes after that, comes after that." He stood up. "But I think you're tired, Seren. I think you have been tired for a long time. And I think the thing you're holding, the documents, the repositories, the journalist's number in your phone, I think carrying it for one more day costs you more than putting it down does." He looked at her one last time. Then he walked out of the lobby into the Mapo night. His phone buzzed 40 minutes later while he was driving. A message from Hana. 2 repositories wiped. Clean pull, no trace. He drove home. Well, Park delivered the document case at 11:45 that night. He brought it to Taehyun's apartment building personally, handed it to the doorman with a message that said only, "I'll be at the gala." No other communication. Taehyun received the case, opened it, confirmed the contents, and locked it in his own safe. He did not sleep that night either, but it was a different kind of not sleeping than the nights before. Not the not sleeping of crisis, but the not sleeping of aftermath. Of a man sitting in the wreckage of something he built and trying to see, clearly, what pieces are worth salvaging and what the ground underneath actually looks like now that the structure has come down. He sat at his kitchen table until 4 in the morning with a legal pad and a pen, and he wrote. Not for anyone else, not for lawyers or testimony or public record. He wrote down what he remembered of the 4 years with Naomi, the specific texture of it, the details he had kept locked away because accessing them had required also accessing the knowledge of what he had done, and he had needed for 20 years not to fully access that. He wrote it all down. At 4:15, he tore the pages out, folded them, and put them in an envelope. He wrote Naomi's name on the outside. He did not know yet if he would give it to her, but he wrote it down because some part of him understood that the act of writing it, of making it real and recorded and present rather than buried, was necessary before the gala, before the public version. He needed to have told the truth in private first, to himself, on paper, before he could tell it to 700 people under television lights. He sealed the envelope. He put it in the same drawer where, for 19 years, he had kept the report that said she was dead. He closed the drawer. The Kang Foundation Gala was held on a Saturday in late October, in the same Grand Hyun Hotel ballroom where the succession ceremony had been 6 weeks earlier. The irony of the venue was not lost on Taehyun when he confirmed the booking. He had confirmed it anyway, because if the story had started here, it was appropriate that it turn here. 712 people attended. The guest list had not been significantly modified from the original, The same politicians, the same executives, the same carefully positioned representatives of organizations that operated in the spaces between legal and not. He had considered narrowing the list, removing the most exposed individuals, reducing the audience to something more manageable. He had decided against it. Naomi had asked for the room full. He was going to give her the room full. Television cameras from 4 networks were set up along the east wall. He had not hidden the fact of their presence. He had in fact issued a press statement 3 days earlier announcing that he would be making a significant personal statement at the gala, which was the kind of thing that guaranteed the cameras would be there and well positioned. Naomi arrived at 7:15 with Elias. Taehyun saw them come in from across the room. Elias was in a dark suit. His first, Taehyun suspected, judging by the slight careful quality with which he wore it, as though he was still negotiating the relationship between his body and the formality of the clothes. He wore it well. He wore it with the same contained, deliberate presence he brought to everything. Naomi was in deep green tonight, not the black of 6 weeks ago. Different statement. Something about it. The color. The choice to wear something different from the night of maximum tension felt to Taehyun like a signal he could read but could not fully translate. He did not approach them immediately. He moved through the room for the first hour the way he always moved through rooms, reading the positions, noting the conversations, tracking the temperature of the assembled alliances. Park Jun-seok was near the north wall, glass in hand, speaking to someone from the financial sector. He met Taehyun's eyes across the room once and held the look for a beat and then looked away. There was no aggression in it. There was something closer to a man who has made a decision and is living in the early hours of whatever comes after. Serin was not there. She had not been invited. He had expected her absence. He had also expected every hour of the preceding 3 weeks. The phone call or the message that said she had changed her mind, that the journalist meeting had been confirmed, that the window had closed. The call had not come. She had been quiet for 3 weeks and he had not heard from her, and he had understood her silence the way you understand the silence of someone who is exhausted, in the specific way that requires them to put everything down and simply stop moving for a while. At 8:30, the MC, the same one from 6 weeks ago, who had been re-engaged at Taehyun's specific request, because there was something important about having the same witness to both nights, announced that Chairman Kang wished to address the room. The room settled. Taehyun walked to the stage alone. No security, no prepared notes. He had written and rewritten and eventually thrown away every prepared version because each one was shaped, even unconsciously, by the habit of controlling the narrative, of selecting and framing and presenting rather than simply saying. He had decided that the only version worth delivering was the uncontrolled one. He stood at the microphone. He looked at the room. 700 people. The cameras along the east wall. The particular quality of attention that fills a large room when the person at the front of it is about to say something that everyone present can sense will change the shape of what they are witnessing. He found Naomi and Elias in the crowd. They were standing near the back, not seated, which he understood. This was not a moment for the comfort of chairs. Naomi's hands were at her sides. Elias stood slightly behind her left shoulder, his eyes on Taehyun, steady and dark and patient. Taehyun looked at his son, then he looked at the room. 20 years ago, he said, I sent an innocent woman to prison. No preamble. No context setting. He had promised himself the first sentence would be the truth undressed, and he delivered it, and he felt the room receive it. The sharp collective recalibration, the stillness that followed the words as they moved through the space and landed in the bodies of 700 people who had come to a gala and were now in something else entirely. Her name is Naomi Brooks Kang. She was 28 years old. She was pregnant with my child. I received fabricated evidence claiming she had betrayed my organization, and I did not question it. I did not go to her. I did not read her letters. I gave the order that ended her freedom, and I told myself for 20 years that I had made a difficult but necessary decision based on the information I had. He paused. That was a lie I told myself. I had doubts the first week. I chose not to pursue them because pursuing them would have required me to face what I had done, and I was not willing to do that. The room was not breathing. The evidence was fabricated by Yoon Se-rin, who served as chief legal consultant to this foundation for 20 years. With assistance from a network of forged documentation, that I am today providing to the prosecutor's office in full." He reached into his jacket and removed a folded document, a single page, the summary index of everything his legal team had prepared, and he placed it on the podium. Her actions, and the actions of those who assisted her, are documented. The evidence is complete. I am not providing this information as a negotiation or a partial disclosure. I am providing everything. What did he be a machine? He looked at the cameras. My son is 19 years old. He was born inside Chungbuk Correctional Facility. He grew up without his father because his father chose an empire over integrity. He stopped. That is not a dramatic way of saying something complex. It is the plain description of what happened. He looked back toward the rear of the room, toward Naomi. I cannot give back 20 years. I cannot give back 14 letters. I cannot give back the first word, or the first step, or the first morning of a child's life that I should have been present for. His voice was level. He was keeping it level by a combination of will and the specific cold discipline of a man who had decided that breaking down at the podium was a performance of remorse rather than its substance, and that Naomi did not need his performance. What I can do is tell the truth, completely, in this room, in front of every person who has built their position on the foundation of what I built, so that they understand what the foundation was. He took a slow breath. The investigation that follows this statement will be comprehensive. Aspects of this foundation's operations and the network connected to it will not survive that investigation. I am aware of this. I am not attempting to limit its scope. He looked out at the assembled faces, the politicians with their carefully neutral expressions, the executives doing rapid interior calculations, the crime organization representatives who had gone entirely still, in the way of people who understand that the ground under their feet has just changed composition. If you are in this room and you have reason to be concerned about what a comprehensive investigation means for you, I suggest you consult counsel before you leave tonight. A sound moved through the room. Not panic. The deep collective exhalation of 700 people absorbing a detonation that had been delivered without warning and without drama, and was, for that reason, considerably more devastating than if it had been either of those things. He stepped back from the microphone. He walked off the stage, not into the wings, down the 3 steps to the ballroom floor, and then through the room, through the stillness and the murmuring and the beginning of the cellular phone calls that would take what had just happened and begin distributing it outward into the city and beyond. The networks, the feeds, the reporters already typing with the footage running, the prosecutors who would be receiving calls from colleagues within the hour. He walked to the back of the room. He stopped in front of Naomi. She was looking at him with an expression he had not seen on her face before. Not in the ballroom 6 weeks ago, not in the cafe, not in any of the fraught and careful conversations of the preceding month. It was not forgiveness. He did not expect forgiveness, had not stood at that microphone to earn forgiveness. It was something more complicated and more honest. The expression of a person who has been waiting for a specific thing to happen for 20 years and has just watched it happen and is now in the strange, unfamiliar territory of what comes after waiting. Her eyes were wet. She did not blink it away. She let it be there, which he understood, knowing what he knew of her, was its own significant act. "The letters," she said. Her voice was low, audible only between the two of them. "Seyrin intercepted them," he said. "I found out the night of the cafe meeting. I should have told you that night. I didn't because I—" He stopped. "I wasn't ready to say it out loud yet. I'm sorry." She looked at him. "I know," she said. "Elias told me." He looked at his son. Elias was looking at him with that steady, patient attention, and in it Tai-hyun could see the 19 years of a life he had not witnessed, the particular quality of a young man who had grown up without a father and had made, out of that absence, not bitterness, not emptiness, but a kind of self-possession that did not require external validation to hold its shape. He had not made this. Naomi had made this. And yet standing here, looking at this young man's face, Tae-hyun felt the specific, profound weight of relation, not ownership, not pride in the possessive sense, but the simpler, more devastating recognition of someone who is yours and whom you are. Elias reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket. He withdrew an envelope. He held it out to Tae-hyun. Tae-hyun looked at it. Then he took it. The envelope was sealed, his name written on the outside in handwriting he did not recognize. Young, careful, the handwriting of someone who had learned it without him. "You don't have to open it tonight," Elias said. "It's not a list of demands. It's just—" He paused. The first time Taehyun had seen him pause before a sentence, the first crack in the composed surface, small and human and entirely real. "It's things I wanted you to know, about what it was like growing up, the good parts, not just the hard parts." He held Taehyun's gaze. "My mother said you should know the good parts too." Taehyun looked at the envelope. He thought about the envelope in his drawer at home, with Naomi's name on it. He thought about the drawer he had locked 19 years ago. He put the envelope in his jacket pocket against his chest, and he did something he had not done in front of witnesses in 30 years. He let his face do what it needed to do, not fully. He was still, constitutionally, a private man, and some things belong to the interior regardless of what else changes. But enough. Enough that Elias could see it. Enough that it was real. "Thank you," he said. The word came out rough, honest. The investigation was announced formally the following Monday. The prosecutor's office held a press conference. The 43-page document, the forensic evidence from Naomi's specialist, and the full archival record from the Kang Foundation's legal files were entered into the official record. Taehyun appeared voluntarily for questioning on Wednesday and spent 11 hours in the building answering everything. Yoon Se-rin turned herself in on Thursday morning, accompanied by her own attorney. She had arranged a cooperation agreement that had been in negotiation, Taehyun later learned, for the entire 3 weeks between the cafe and the gala. She had been preparing her cooperation simultaneously with the threat, the way Se-rin always prepared multiple contingencies, maintaining optionality until the last possible moment. The cooperation agreement was substantial. Her testimony was detailed. She spent 14 months in proceedings before sentencing. Park Jun-seok was not charged. The investigation examined his tenure carefully and found insufficient evidence of direct participation in the Naomi conspiracy, because he had not been part of it, having joined the organization 3 years after Naomi's imprisonment. The Incheon situation produced a separate set of legal complications that occupied his attorneys for the better part of 2 years and resulted in a significant financial settlement and the quiet dissolution of 3 connected entities. He left the Kang organizational structure formally in the spring of the following year. He sent Taehyun a single message the day he left. "I hope you find what you're looking for." Taehyun read it twice and did not reply, because he did not know yet what reply was accurate. The Kang Foundation did not survive in its original form. Aspects of it were wound down immediately. 3 legitimate subsidiaries, a hospital funding program, an educational endowment, a small arts organization that had been genuinely independent of the criminal structure and had been funded through clean channels, were restructured under new governance and continued operating. Taehyun spent the following 18 months working with a court-appointed compliance monitor to dismantle the rest. Systematically, organization by organization, asset by asset, in a process that was unglamorous and slow and frequently painful, and which he did not attempt to rush because rushing it would have been about his own discomfort rather than about doing it correctly. He did not hand any of it to Elias. Elias did not want any of it. By the following spring, Elias had enrolled in a pre-law program at a university in Seoul. He had chosen Seoul deliberately. Taehyun knew this because Elias had told him, directly, in the cafe in Mapo where they continued to meet, every 2 weeks now, without attorneys or formal agreements, just the 2 of them, and occasionally Naomi, in the corner table that had become, without anyone formally designating it, theirs. "I could have gone to the States," Elias said one afternoon in March, a cup of coffee going warm between his hands. "My mother wanted me to, actually. She had a program lined up at Georgetown." "Why didn't you?" Taehyun said. Elias looked at him with the level, considering look that Taehyun had come to understand was his version of the same expression Taehyun himself made when he was deciding how direct to be. "Because I wasn't finished here yet," Elias said. "I don't mean with you. I mean with understanding what this place is, what it made, what it cost." He turned the cup in his hands. "I want to understand it properly before I decide what I'm going to do about it." "You're going to be a lawyer," Taehyun said. "I'm going to be a lawyer," Elias said. "The question is what kind?" Taehyun looked at him. At his son's face, which he had now been looking at regularly for several months and which had ceased to be disorienting. The resemblance no longer felt like displacement, but like continuity, like seeing the same river at a different point along its course. "The kind that understands how the structure works," Taehyun said, "from the inside." Elias looked at him. "Yeah," he said. "Something like that." The envelope sat in Taehyun's jacket pocket for 3 days before he opened it. He opened it on a Sunday morning at the kitchen table with coffee he actually intended to drink this time. He unfolded the pages, 4 of them, handwritten on plain paper, and he read his son's account of a childhood. The specific texture of it. A small apartment in the Hanam district where Naomi had settled after the years of moving, a neighborhood with a market on Sundays, and a park where Elias had learned to ride a bicycle and fallen off and learned again. The names of 2 friends from middle school. The specific memory of the first time Naomi had told him, clearly and without softening, who his father was and what his father had done and what she had decided to do about it. And the specific memory of sitting with that information at age 12 and feeling not hatred, but something more complicated. The beginning of the question that had eventually brought him, 7 years later, to a hotel ballroom in Seoul. He wrote about a teacher who had recognized something in him and pushed him. He wrote about a book, a history of Korean law, that he had found in a second-hand shop at 15 and read 3 times, and which had changed the direction of what he thought was possible. He wrote about his mother, the specific quality of her discipline, her humor, the way she laughed rarely but completely, the way she had taught him to be patient, not by telling him to be patient, but by demonstrating it across 19 years of her own life. And at the end, in a paragraph that was shorter than the others and more careful, as though he had written it several times before arriving at the final version, Elias had written, "I don't know yet what you are to me. I know what you did. I know what you've done since. I know what it cost you, and I know it doesn't balance. Cost on one side, what was lost on the other. It doesn't balance, it will never balance, and I think you know that. But I'm here. I came to Seoul. I'm in this city, learning its laws, sitting at that table on Wednesdays. That's not nothing. I need you to know it's not nothing." Taehyun read that paragraph twice. He folded the pages back into the envelope. He put the envelope in the drawer. Next to the envelope with Naomi's name on it, which he had not yet given her but which he would, he had decided. Not soon. When the time was accurate. When it could be received for what it was. Not a transaction, not an apology seeking return. Simply the truth, written down, offered. He sat at the kitchen table with his coffee and the morning light coming through the window, and he sat with the specific, quiet weight of a life that had arrived, by the most terrible and circuitous route, at something that resembled its own beginning. 6 years later, on a Thursday afternoon in June, Kang Tae-hyun sat in the front row of a university auditorium in Seoul and watched his son walk across a stage. Naomi sat beside him. She had cut her hair shorter since the gala year. There were more lines at the corners of her eyes than there had been, and she carried herself with a looseness, a physical ease that had not been in her body during the years of the fight. The years when everything she did was in service of the thing she was building toward. The fight was over. The body knew it. She had rebuilt her consulting practice in Seoul. She had not returned to the United States, which had surprised him until it didn't. Seoul was Elias's city now, and Naomi had spent 19 years organizing her life around her son's location, and she was not going to stop now that the location had settled. They were not together, she and Taehyun. That was not the shape of what had formed between them. Not reconciliation in the romantic sense, but something more durable and more honest. 2 people who shared the most important person in either of their lives and had arrived, through enormous difficulty, at a way of being in the same room that did not require either of them to be something they weren't. On certain Sundays, he came for dinner at the apartment she shared with Elias in Mapo. She cooked. He brought the good tea she had told him once, years ago in the cafe, that she had missed. A specific brand from a shop in Insadong that had taken him 2 weeks to find because he had been too proud initially to admit he didn't know where to look. He brought it every time. She never acknowledged it. He kept bringing it. The auditorium applause moved through the rows as names were called. Taehyun sat with his hands on his knees and watched the stage, and felt the particular quality of the afternoon. The light through the high windows, the warmth of the room, The smell of the folded programs that people were using as fans in the June heat. All of it ordinary and specific and vivid in the way that things are vivid when you are paying full attention because you have learned, at considerable cost, what it means not to. Elias Brooks. His name in the announcer's voice. His name, Brooks, Naomi's name, the name he had grown into and which was fully his, moving through the auditorium and arriving in the front row where Tae-hyun heard it and felt it in his chest without trying to qualify it or contain it. Elias walked across the stage. He shook the dean's hand. He received the folder. He looked like himself, still that contained deliberate presence, still the quality of someone who fills space without effort. But there was something different in him today, a looseness around the edges of the composure, the specific ease of a person who has completed a thing they set out to do. He found their row before he came down from the stage. He looked at the front row, and Tae-hyun watched his son's eyes move from his mother's face to his own, and he watched the specific expression that arrived on Elias's face in that moment. Not the restrained assessment of the early years, not the careful watchfulness of a young man deciding whether a thing was safe. Something simpler. Something that did not need to be examined or qualified. Elias stepped down from the stage. He moved through the row of seats, other families pressing back to let him through, and he came to them and he stood in front of them and he looked at Naomi, and she stood and he held her for a long moment, her hand on the back of his head, her eyes closed, the two of them in the specific privacy of a mother and son that had nothing to do with anyone else and did not need to. Then Naomi stepped back. Elias turned to Tae-hyun. Tae-hyun had risen from his seat without deciding to, was standing in the way he had been standing at the obsidian table the night of the succession ceremony, but different. He was standing without armor, without the composed face and the controlled breathing and the 30 years of performance. He was just standing. Elias looked at him. He bowed. A full, deliberate bow. Not the small professional acknowledgement, the deep bow, the one that carries weight in it. Then he straightened. He looked Tae-hyun in the eyes. "Father," he said. The word landed. It was a single syllable, and it was the most specific thing Tae-hyun had ever heard, more specific than any contract or confession or carefully constructed truth. A word that had a shape and a weight that you could only understand if you had spent years believing you would never hear it, and then spent more years learning, slowly, that the earning of it required you to become someone different from the person who had forfeited the right to it. He had become someone different. It had cost everything. It was not enough. It was what he had. He put his hand on his son's shoulder and he held it there, and he did not speak because there was nothing to say that would be more accurate than the weight of his hand and his son's face and the afternoon light coming through the windows, and Naomi, 2 feet away, watching with her arms crossed and her chin lifted, and the beginning of a smile at the corner of her mouth. Not a performance of emotion, not a resolution, just the specific, honest expression of a woman who had carried a very heavy thing for a very long time and had finally set it down in the right place. The auditorium moved around them. Other families, other names, other histories folding into the ordinary noise of a June afternoon. The city outside went about its business. The Han River moved through Seoul the way it always had, through every season of everything that had happened on its banks, indifferent and continuous, and carrying everything forward whether or not the people on the shore were ready. Kang Tae-hyun stood in the front row of a university auditorium with his hand on his son's shoulder and his son's words still alive in his chest, and he understood, with the clarity that only arrives at the end of things, that he had not built the wrong life because of who he was. He had built the wrong life because of who he had been afraid to be. He was not afraid anymore. That was enough. That was everything.